So I'm going to talk about deliverance today. Of course, I think deliverance is in this ideal position where lots of people have heard about it, but no one knows what it is. So you all show up to find out what it is, or what you might be able to do with it. The number of people I've said, "Oh, I'm going to use deliverance," just huge numbers. Use deliverance is small, but but yeah, there's clearly. So I mean, I hope it won't be a letdown. So I'm going to kind of start the talk just by doing a demonstration. Probably something will go horribly wrong, but maybe not. Just to kind of give a feel for kind of what deliverance does, what its scope is, and then after I've done a demo, you'll feel a little bit clearer about what I'm talking about when I talk about the some of the more technical parts of it. So you probably have heard deliverance is a tool for kind of theming websites. It is no programming involved. You'll never see any Python. I'm pretty sure there's no Python in the entire talk. It's all HTML and CSS and a special custom configuration file. So been working on the installation lately. If you want to try it out, first of all, I've tested stuff out on Linux. I have no idea what the best way to go about it in Windows is at this point, so I'm sure it'll work at some point, but I have not made it any easier. And unfortunately, it's kind of hard on Macs. It uses a library called LXML, which you have to tweak it out a little bit on Mac, and you can use it. But if you have a choice of things when you want to try starting out, I would definitely recommend starting out with Linux because it'll just be easier. So I've written a quick start. So in terms of installation, if you go to the website and look at the quick start, it takes you up from, you don't really have to know anything about anything else about build out because it doesn't use build out, but it'll get you through. And right now the product I'm going to show you hasn't had a formal release. It's going to be version 0.3. Which I'll be releasing soon. But I'm making regular snapshots, which include all the dependencies, and so you'll get something that's kind of a known set of things that all work together. And this is what the quick start basically looks like. You just grab one big PyBundle file that contains everything. So I'm going to do demo. So once you have installed it, you will have you'll be able to use Paster to get started. And there's a deliverance clone template. Ask you a few question names. What am I doing? Demo. Site name, clone. This is a host it serves on. The back end, so I have, well, I will be starting Plone on that port. You can have it rewrite links. I guess I'll talk about that later, actually. And at this stage, you could have it pull in a theme from a URL that you already have, and it'll pull in all the files and all the CSS so you can kind of edit them locally and clone it. Without a network connection, that doesn't really work well, so I'm just going to copy some files in for the theme. So now I have the demo. Now let me first. So the demo has a configuration file, some log files, and the theme, which is just an HTML file. You'll write it just like any other HTML file. You can include anything you want in there. I grabbed a website before this to use an example. So the theme as it is right now is just the web page of the Open Clouding project, kind of an example page. Of course, Nothing's been done to this. There's no special code. There's no special attributes. It's purely a normal HTML page that happens to work. I didn't, go to any particular trouble to make sure all the links were relative. Everything just is normal HTML. So I start with that, and I run the deliverance proxy. So deliverance works as an kind of an HTTP proxy. All the requests go into deliverance, and then it sends the request to another server. In this case, I'll be sending it to Plone. It doesn't really know anything about the server. It doesn't have any special Plone knowledge. That would share absolutely no code with Plone. You have completely different environments. You would manage them separately. Could send it just as well to PHP as to Plone as to any other server process. So here it is, and this is the default rules that combine the two. So this is the content from coming from Plone, and this is the page that serves as a theme. Now it has built into it a kind of a debugging console, so you can kind of see what's going on and work with the system. So you have to log into it first, and then just add deliv log to the end of the URL. And if you go down to the bottom, it kind of tells you everything that went on during the theming process. So this goes through all the steps. It's probably can be filtered down a little bit more. There's not that many that went on that put these things together. It's all based on a rule file. So here's the rule file. I'll scale this up. As you can see, it's an XML file. Has the basic server settings and such. The rules in particular here are right down here. It has some examples in it, but it's this one right here. Replace content. Let me make that a little smaller. Oh, that doesn't help. So it says take all the children of the tag with the ID content, just like it's a CSS selector, and put it in the theme where it has the ID content. Let me see where. So, I mean, that's a very basic example, of course. All you have is just the content sitting in a chunk, and everything else remains static, which is not terribly interesting. So kind of another example of something you can do. I've created a sidebar page. It's not very exciting here. It's just a number of links. I haven't even made them real links. But say you want to use something like this to manually manage this sidebar over here. So you'd add another rule here. I'll get rid of some of these examples. Well, so here I'm going to take all the children, I say do a sub request and get the page at sidebar. And from that page that you get, take everything. We'll have to, well, it'll be everything that's inside that content because it's just a normal page again. And put it into the theme in, I'm not sure what they, oh, I don't have an internet connection, of course. And we'll put it in this block so we can just look at the div ID sidebar. Oh, it works out perfect. So we'll just children sidebar. Save that. Go on the page. And so here we have the sidebars kind of moved over into that location. Now that can be anything dynamic. It could be some little search form. It could be something from a different application. You can kind of mix the content from different applications using this. And again, like, I think you can make it as dynamic as you want on any of these. pieces, any of these URLs that you're bringing in, can be dynamic. So I mean, looking at this, there's this little by admin thing there, which is kind of annoying. So we can get rid of that. Fortunately, this. So we want to drop something. So this is kind of just a way of kind of putting in like little hacks when you like are designing something. You say like, oh, there's this little piece of something and I just don't want it there, or I do want it there. You kind of adjust the rules to deal with that. So we're going to drop something. It's going to be, and let me see what that's called. Document byline. Okay. Oh, sure. Yeah, it's actually kosher inside quotation marks, but. And that'll just kind of make that go away. And you'll often use that for things like removing a CSS file or something like that that's just causing problems. Now, as you can see, the editing content in place works okay. You can do all of this. But of course, you don't have the full access to all the Plone stuff. So in this default configuration, it has two URLs that both point to Plone. And so this one is the same thing, but presented in an unthemed manner. So I mean, I think one of the ways it would be more logical to use this with Plone is that when people are actually using and editing inside Plone, it makes sense to have the entire Plone UI and not have to worry about any sorts of conflicts. At the same time, when you're actually presenting the site to the outside world, you can have the themed version and have both those. So I think that's kind of all of the. Oh, well, I was going to show you can also include different things from different locations. So for instance, I have some static files. And so I can tell deliverance to take everything, to route some requests to some servers and some requests to other ones. Here I will go to some static files made by Sphinx. If I go to, I get the files here. Now they're not themed, so I'm going to look at why they're not themed. I'll look at the log. And we'll go down here, and there's probably going to be some sort of aborting theming because no content matches the role. Content equals children with the ID of the element with the ID content. So the Plone content has one layout and has a particular ID where the content is. Sphinx isn't creating that same kind of content. So I'm going to, there's always a problem when you get competing stuff here. I'm going to go to Browse Content. Sphinx is a document generator. It's kind of like, that's what the Python documentation is made with. So it's just something that generates a bunch of static files for programmer documentation. So here I can look through and I can say, body looks like the right thing, and it'll highlight it, and I can look through the different pieces. So body is the right one. So instead I'll go back here and I'll have to add body as another location here. So it can be content or the thing with the class body. And this is an either or. If it finds anything with content, then it'll use that. But if it finds nothing, then it'll use the next one. You can keep doing this. And with multiple applications, you almost always have to have different selectors. Yeah,
Body is a class. You could have multiple classes of that.
Yes. Well, you can specify explicitly if you want to, but it'll generally pick it'll pick every element in this case, because you can take multiple elements from the theme and move them over to the content. So that could end up with weird results.
Put in one after another.
Correct. Now, in the case of a theme, if say you had a theme where you had a body class, you wouldn't want to copy the content over multiple times for each container. And in that case, it'll choose the first one, and it'll kind of show up as a warning, or you can also tell it to use the last one or something else. So I'll try this again. All right, now we got that in there. And you can do like one extra little thing. If you look at the content over here, I mean, there's useful navigation stuff over here. It is in this Sphinx sidebar class. And so, and you might want to combine the navigation from both pieces in this case. So you might say, anytime there is content that is with Sphinx sidebar, append it to the insides of sidebar element. So now these kind of showed up here. Now one problem you'll notice, and it's kind of an unresolved problem at this point for deliverance. If you look at this page, it looks like one thing. And if you go back to a Plone generated page, it looks different. And that's because deliverance is actually taking all of the resources from both the theme, which includes things like a bunch of images and CSS, it might have some JavaScript, and it's also taking all the resources from the original content, and it's mixing them both together. Because sometimes there's important CSS. Like if you load Kupu here, there's a whole bunch of CSS associated with that, and it all has to be available. But there's a high probability of conflict between the CSS that Plone serves up and the theme and the CSS that other things serve up. So I'll kind of try later to talk about some possible solutions there. Of course, one of them is to edit the Plone CSS or drop it entirely and then bring in some CSS that's somehow kind of some neutral sort of CSS. So I mean that's a basic demo of what deliverance does. If there's any questions, please. Oh, yes.
Two use cases. I'll just say both of them. The first one is contributors need to log into a styled website.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, you can't have a separate URL where it's just vanilla flow. How well does deliverance deal with that? So that's the first one. So a custom UI where you
Sure.
can log in and the second one is a really granular requirement. Things like the fancy styling on the calendar, other portraits, and things like that. How does deliverance deal with that?
So you can do so the sorry. So two use cases he was asking about. The first one is what if you actually do want a styled editing interface, and the second one being what if you have some exceptional cases, like there's maybe one page or one piece of something where you need to mess around with the styling more. So I guess there's two. Well, one is that you can include the entire UI here instead of just getting the content. I could include a larger chunk of the content. I could also say take the Plone tabs and append them to the sidebar, or have a theme that has some sort of top bar where I can append things. You could even have a space in the theme where tabs could go if they are present, And if you don't see any, and if there are no tabs present, then, you know, get rid of that space in the theme. The deliverance theme. Clone themes are, I don't know what you can do with clone themes, actually. So I'm sure you can do everything with clone themes, none of which relates to, well, some does, and that's part of getting around the conflict is, I can imagine a world where there's one clone theme that is low conflict. So the second thing you were asking about is, what about when you have an exceptional piece of the site, some part that just needs to be themed differently. And there's a variety of different ways that you can control that. You can do little matches. You can say, you know, anything that has the path calendar, it'll be the page class calendar. And then instead of this rules and basically getting rid of the entire, there, instead of using normal rules at all, you use a rule set specific to calendar. And you can match on all sorts of things. You can match on headers. You can say, you know, certain user agents should not see this, or unfortunately, login can be a little bit hard because it can be hard to actually check the login credentials at the point that deliverance is running. But if you do have, if you are running at a point in the stack where, say, there was a header set that would indicate whether the user was logged in, you could use that to add special rules that are specific to that specific case. So, and you can suppress any number of rules or also combine them using different kind of groupings of these rules and different matches.
The first thing was good. That's not quite the second question I was asking.
Okay.
It's more to do with, I can see where you can take chunks of content. So you can take the calendar wholesale and drop it into a new theme. But there are scenarios where you want to really tweak out the calendar.
Okay, so like let's say the actual content just wasn't quite like how you wanted it.
Right.
Deliverance cannot do anything to that. You'd have to do that transformation separately. It's possible that there might involve some things that will only be hacks, really, at the best, that would allow you to do some sort of modification. But one of the core ideas of Deliverance is it doesn't know anything about content,
So it's more
or it doesn't modify it.
of a make-up.
Yeah, it moves around pieces that already exist. So it doesn't ever generate any HTML. It always modifies stuff that it's already getting. And so there still has to be a place for you to edit the underlying templates and edit. So it doesn't get rid of all templates and all customization, because there's a lot of time, you know, what if the template just doesn't have some information you need? There's no way for Deliverance to kind of conjure that from the application. In the same way, like, while you can modify things, for the most part, it's still going to be important to have kind of the inner content controlled by templates that people will need to override kind of regularly. Or, Paul?
Just a follow-up to that. There are other options once you get into Ian's world for this about middleware. Writing something that, for example, measured the elapsed time to render the clone page and then injecting at the bottom of the screen. You know, these took 0.1 days. Is in the world of middleware, it becomes a stupendously easy thing to do. I did that a couple of days ago, and it was probably around 8 lines. So you can still do some of his ideas without having to go into each one of your back-end applications and learn how they generate your content.
And the underlying things that Deliverance is using for that, which is lxml.html, which is library for parsing and working with HTML, and it's using some different parts of WSGI for moving the requests around, are something that are actually pretty well abstracted out of there. So if you want to do other kinds of custom filtering and even do that at the HTTP level, it's I don't think it's a terribly hard programming task. Of course, it doesn't involve programming.
What's the performance overhead of doing the sort of post-processing?
I do not know yet. We did do testing of the older version. I did a rewrite which to kind of clean things up and simplify the rules, and I haven't done any testing of that, though it shouldn't be much slower, I don't think. It might even be faster. And the performance was I don't know exactly, except that when we tested Plone and we tested Deliverance, we thought it's vanishingly small performance hit compared to that. But that's not great. It's not like you'd be like, oh, just because it's Plone's way slower. That of course it does make it less of a concern. And a lot of the underlying routines that are doing these transformations are written in C, so it has advantages over something that's really heavy in those terms. So it should be fast. I don't know how fast it is right now. I would say. Mm-hmm.
Alex mentioned there were several flavors of Deliverance. What are the differences?
So there's well, it's had a long history. Paul Everett over there is the one who started it. I remember it had a kind of vague scope. It was going to also be about like navigation generation and a variety of things. And it kind of said, okay, we're just going to think about theming. And then we at Open Plans, the Open Planning project where I work, we kind of thought, okay, this is something I think fits some ideas that we have and about how things might work. And so we kind of ended up taking over the development from that stage. At that stage, it had kind of two different ways of doing the transformations. One was pure Python kind of running through the rules, and another one was an XSLT thing where it would actually take those rules these rules and compile it down to an XSLT template and then run that. And we had a hard time maintaining the two, and there were some points at which it was hard to keep feature parity when we thought there's a feature that we really think is interesting and useful, and the XSLT version just made that hard at sometimes. And so we ended up kind of dropping that in part because Paul's very comfortable with XSLT, but no one else is anywhere. And so it was just hard for us at that point. We were doing that development. It was hard for us to maintain that. Now at a certain point, I was after kind of using Deliverance for a while and like feeling some tensions and getting some feedback from people, I kind of wanted to take it all in, and I did a major rewrite just a few months ago that didn't try to do anything with XSLT and went with the pure Python path because I knew what I was going to do in that case. At the same time, Paul was starting to think about it again, and he wrote another XSLT version, just kind of bringing it back, all those old ideas at that point. And that version is actually I believe it's an XSLT transform that transforms Deliverance rules into XSLT rules. So it's pretty deep metaprogramming. It's and we've been talking about that, and I mean the ideal thing that we're hoping is that the XSLT will be equivalent to all the stuff that's written in Python, and not every there's some fancy hooks where you can call Python code, and that's not going to happen in XSLT. That's kind of the point. There's some of this proxying stuff, which is I think it's stuff that makes Deliverance useful, but it's not stuff that is core to the idea of theming. So hopefully the XSLT version can be a deployment option that you can consider at, and that this might be the better way to develop and try to figure out what's going on. And then later on you can potentially deploy with the XSLT version if it's really able to do that. I know that would be hard. XSLT can be kind of tricky to know exactly which things you can do. For instance, I'm using CSS selectors, which I decided I really liked CSS selectors compared to XPath, which is the normal selector thing for XSLT, and figuring out how to implement that in the XSLT version might be difficult. So I mean, we'll see where it goes, but we are definitely keeping together in some sort of idea of something, I guess. I don't know. Lots of questions. You won't get to any slides at all, I guess, but that's perfectly fine. Yes.
Following on from the bank's question, if you can't do everything in Deliverance, is there a risk of increasing the learning curve even further? That themers learn this, but then suddenly they're going to jump into Python?
I think actually the question was, does this just add another thing that just makes it even harder because you have to know everything you had to know before plus this? And obviously very possibly. And it depends on what kind of control. And of course, designers often just want to tweak absolutely anything and everything because someone comes to them and just makes little requirements about how certain pixels line up somewhere, and controlling that can be difficult. There are ways to hack around a lot of pieces, so you can drop CSS files and rewrite them yourself and do things like that. So it gives you opportunities where there might be multiple places to do it, but the way you would do it through Deliverance, I think, is pretty clear, and that it feels very concrete. You're just going in there and you're dealing with the HTML, and there's no hidden knowledge. There's, the HTML is all the information there is in Deliverance. There's no back-end Python objects, there's no interfaces, there's no other configuration. So it's this very limited set of things that you have to think about, because that's all that can possibly be there. Now, of course, when the content being generated is just, beyond hope of being reformed after the processing, you really need to make it correctly the first time. Yeah, there is definitely a problem, and I think we've had a problem where people have been like, I don't know where this comes from, I don't know what I'm supposed to edit. I kind of know how to edit the ZOP templates, now I have to know how to edit these, now I have to know which is which. And I do really hope that we can figure out a way. I mean, I think some of the stuff that I've seen with Glowworm, I don't know a whole lot about it, but the idea of having this kind of backtrack ability where you can look at an element and say, where did this come from and why is it like that, is definitely something that I want to support in Deliverance, to the degree that Deliverance knows where the elements came from, because to a certain degree they come from things that it's putting together, combined with ideally backend servers that'll add extra information, say like, this is the exact file that this came from, and then Deliverance can add some extra information, like this is the URL that it came from, and try to preserve all that stuff. And I would definitely like to do that, because it is a definite problem.
Okay, a clarification and then a can of worms. The clarification is, does Deliverance actually request everything from the ZOP server that the browser normally requests?
Yes, it requests everything and then throws a bunch of stuff away.
Okay, so my can of worms is, what about caching?
You could put a cache between Deliverance and ZOP. That would be the ideal solution. I mean, there could be an in-process cache in Deliverance. That would be possible if there was one. I think actually Trace was thinking about a WSGI-based in-process cache, which could be an interesting thing. On either end, it might be fine. Mm-hmm.
How do you deal with HTTP headers? Like, you get the headers from page requests and put them back in the headers?
So he's asking about HTTP headers. Those are all left exactly as they were. There's a few extra proxying-based headers, like so that ZOP can know what the original request URL was. The virtual host monster stuff.
If you have several sources, how do you deal with it?
So like when I got the sidebar, those headers are all thrown away. Definitely. Now the incoming headers to the sidebar are actually the same as the incoming headers to the original request, except for those ones that are have to be changed for whatever reason. But like, you don't want a last modified to go to every sub request, because that's going to totally confuse things. But yes, it does send all the request headers, and it throws away all the response headers except for the response headers from the primary resource that was being fetched. Any other questions?
So you can work out the squid and stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, it speaks normal HTTP. There is a consideration that, if you have a last modified on the primary resource, but one of the sub resources gets modified, that you might not see that. And we have played around with ideas of the least common denominator in terms of last modified and in terms of other things. And I'm not even sure, it might be better to stick with the naive way, because the complex ways of doing that can be tricky. So, Paul.
Can I follow up on that point earlier about the complexity of having to learn two things where before you have one thing? This is more on the clone side than on the Deliverance side. It would be useful to find out what people want. I mean, there's a hypothesis that people who are good at design might not be that thrilled about multi-adapters and tools. And if they go look at the main template, they see a lot of stuff that is going to freak them out. So there is, if that hypothesis is true and Clone wants to change that, we have to decide, do we carve off a particular part of the functionality, make it very simple with concepts they understand, while leaving another part that is full-on technology. no matter whether it's deliverance or some other thing, we desire to split those apart. We got to find out if we want to do that or not. I don't know. I don't feel that there is consensus yet on the idea that the word theme should mean a really simple facility and skins should mean the whole enchilada.
I mean, we have heard from our designers that it adds one more thing, especially when you do have to sometimes go into the, not sometimes, often go into the underlying SOAP templates, that it's hard. Now, maybe if you have a really easy to skin with CSS kind of thing where everything's totally makes sense and all you have to do is go in with CSS. To some degree, though, of course, you can't add a character if you just want a character someplace. So it can be hard. So let's see. I'm on slide 3 out of 50, I think, or something. Let me see. Well, now I'm way out of order because I've answered these general questions about things that would later show up in my slides. But that's fine. So some of my own motivations of dealing with deliverance. I mean, one of the big ones is that I have personally kind of gone through a relationship with many frameworks in the past. And there's this uncomfortable situation you're in when you've made something that might be good, but you've made it based on something that you just aren't that into anymore. And you either have to like kind of throw it all away and rewrite everything, which is what a lot of places do when they finally come to that, or you keep with a thing that you don't like, which is what all the other places do. So there's that back and forth is really kind of uncomfortable and leads people to not very good choices. And I've been interested in how we can have something where we don't force ourselves into those choices unnecessarily. And also, I mean, another aspect of it is that I feel extremely confident in the ongoing relevance of HTTP and HTML. And I think, you know, if you're gonna bet on technologies, that's like super safe bet. And so building things based on that is safe. Actually, I forget. So as you saw, there's no Python involved. You can aggregate things. Well, I went through those. Let me skip to Y. And another thing that I'm trying to push with deliverance, and it's a large motivation, and it might expand into a project that is bigger than theming and probably has a different name than deliverance, but is supporting a heterogeneous stack, a system where you have lots of different applications written in different languages, all forming a single cohesive website. And I think from the perspective of just, you know, basic economics, that as you kind of have a richer set of features, you actually get less and less audience in a lot of ways. So I think like blogging and Plone, which has always been this kind of like tricky, how's it supposed to work and how it's going to work, and people come and go, and part of that is that, like, well, you can make the awesomest blog in Plone, and almost everyone wouldn't care because almost everyone isn't going to install Plone to set up their blog, and you know, just realistically, that's not the thing that people think of. It's not the strength point. And so if you want to provide the best blog software, you're probably not going to provide it in Plone, except for maybe some integration things, which is what I hope that won't be the choice you have to make, that you either choose to integrate something not as something you can integrate, which is not as good, or something that you can't integrate, which is kind of the best of breed. And as you build it up, you just get a smaller and smaller audience the more technical choices you make, and I find it very unfortunate that we always have to like choose like our kind of tribe every time we try to make an application choice. And like if someone comes to you and is like, I would like this kind of thing, and you want to help them, you either might have to guide them towards the things you understand and feel comfortable deploying, or tell them to go away. And you should always be able to, it's best if you can always guide them to the right things and their best things, and you have access to those things. And so I think that's a better way of helping people make choices. But they are really hard. Heterogeneous stacks are, and theming is just one of many pieces that need to come together to really make it work well and to be easy to develop. So a little about deliverance. Of course, it doesn't have any content that it generates itself. So it always takes the content page and the theme page. The basic process of applying the rules is that you take the theme page as is, and then you start moving things over from the content into the theme page. So if you didn't have any rules at all, you would just get the theme page with nothing. And so you start out, you take the main content, and then you take all the sidebars and whatever else goes in. There's 4 rules, 4 transformations. And you know, XSLT has all the same ideas and desires as deliverance does in a lot of ways. It's a transformation, it filters markup, it does all this. It just happened, deliverance in many ways is just much simpler rules that are oriented towards a very specific use case with the same kind of underlying idea. So there's replace, which you find a piece of the theme, you take it out and you put some content in there. Append, you put some content afterwards, prepend before, of course. And you have a content selector and a theme selector. So in this example, all the children, now you notice each of these is both a selector, a CSS selector, or it can be an XPath as well. And then I haven't figured out a name for it, the thing before it, the modification of it, in this case the children. So you can either select the element itself, so if, say, you were going to replace the element in the theme, you would completely delete that element and then put a new element in. If you replace the children, then you replace all the things inside of it. And you can also do things like replace the tag itself so that you keep all the content, but you just kind of like switch what kind of tag it is. And each of these kind of interact in a different way. So if you append to the children, that means you append inside of the element. If you append to the element, then you actually put something directly after it in the document. This is one of the changes from the older deliverance to this rewrite. Adds this concept because it makes it more fully general, where there were some tricky things you just kind of couldn't do before this. And you can also modify attributes themselves. Something people often have asked for is like they want to, they've been using classes on the body, I think, to apply CSS to certain pages, and they want to just copy the class attribute from the content body into the theme body. So you can select just the attributes and have them replace or append to the other pieces. And then last is drop, which is really just about hacking around different things. In almost every case you use it is because there's just something not quite like you want it to be that you can remove. So these are just a couple of examples. Let me see if I can get that. Yeah, well, the top one. So this one is appending the same one kind of that we saw before. The basic, everything with the class content gets appended to the ID content in the theme. Here you could drop all the font tags if you had someone who was putting font tags in and you just hated that. You can do little bits of cleanup like this, not terribly thorough, but if you start using more sophisticated XPath expressions, you can query for very specific things. You can create an expression. You can also, with CSS, it's actually pretty easy to say, like, I want to drop this particular CSS file that's causing me a problem, so you would search for that. This is the case where you take the class from the body of the content and move it into the body of the theme. Well, here's where you move the copyright into the footer. And this elements is kind of funny. And it seemed to me like the most intuitive, like, well, of course you're going to select an element, but it's almost always the children that you want. You can also add conditionals, so do things like take the tabs from Plone and put them in some place. But also if there's no tabs from Plone, or if someone, like for instance, there's login form, you can use if content to do one kind of transformation when there's a login form and a different transformation when the person's logged in and you're showing their username. So that's It's actually specifically what we've used it for. And there's also a case of like, so let's say you have this rule, and you say if there's no rules that are applied, you're just going to get the theme page with no modifications. So if this main rule about which brings in the main content, if it doesn't match anything, you're going to get a really useless page. And a really common case for this is like maybe like a login page or a 404 page or something like that. So instead you add this no content equals abort. You can have kind of some different options there. So in this case, if the rule isn't going to do anything, then stop all theming, throw deliverance away, because it's better that you get an unthemed page that at least has the information that the person needs to get to. Well, I talked about href with the sidebar. And there's a variety of different ways that you can select different parts of the site and apply different rules to them, do different modifications. One of the features that I think I would like people to use is that you can have it rewrite links. So you can actually point deliverance at a live site, and it'll rewrite all the links on the way in. So you can basically mirror that live site locally using local URLs and apply a new theme to it. So that's a way that a developer can, or a theme developer can start playing around with new ideas or new rules or a new theme without having to have any particular development environment outside of deliverance itself. And you can have many different deliverances all pointing at the same live site, and I don't know, it just it makes it feel much lighter to me, at least I find, to be able to play around with things without having to go through a lot of trouble. Let's get through these. So CSS is probably the biggest issue, and I only have a minute, so I'm just going to say an acknowledgement of different problems. So CSS, each application has its own kind of custom semantic language, which in the form of CSS classes, and of course there's no really good overlap, or sometimes there's bad overlap between these. And as a result, if you take two applications and use the same CSS on them, it's just not going to work because the applications aren't going to generate the same classes. What I would like to see happen is for there to be a better common understanding about what the best CSS classes are, what they really mean, and then in the case of something like Plone, and this is possible for most applications, you can create a skin, and one of the skins would be the semantic CSS standard that we all agree on, which would apply all these kinds of things that multiple applications can agree with. And until that happens, unfortunately, there has to be just like a lot of hacking around, and I think there'll be a lot of copying of CSS files and stuff, so you can make modifications that apply to one product and not another. One of the things coming up is HTML5, which adds new tags, which is actually, to me, it's specifically kind of about this, that there's this new set of semantics that we're trying to express in the case of CSS classes, which no one can agree on. So maybe with HTML5, as we actually have tags that actually have some described meaning that we can all agree on, it might make that better. This is the developer problem, and I guess that's kind of it. So thanks, and if you have any questions, please find me. This is what I'm here to talk about with anyone who wants to talk about it. So thank you.